Hello, everyone. Welcome to the official launch of the Task Force for American Democracy. I am Mary Smith, Director of the Task Force and a past president of the American Bar Association. Our democracy is under stress. Governmental overreach driven by presidents of both parties threatens the foundational principles of our constitutional system, undermining checks and balances, eroding judicial independence, and concentrating power in ways that jeopardize the rule of law. Courts are being politicized, and judges have been facing threats and intimidation simply for doing their jobs. This is not just a legal issue, it's an economic one. Economies and businesses depend on the rule of law because it provides the certainty needed to invest, innovate, and resolve disputes fairly. For the system to function, we must have faith in our institutions and confidence that the law applies equally to everyone. These growing threats must be met with urgency and resolve. Attorneys play a critical role as nonpartisan defenders of our democracy, protecting equal treatment under the law and helping us to educate and mobilize the public against abuses of power. The very future of our democratic institution depends on it. The ABA Task Force for American Democracy was formed in 2023 as my major initiative as president of the American Bar Association. After operating for 2 years as a project of the American Bar Association, the Task Force for American Democracy today is launching as an independent nonprofit corporation. So it's a very exciting day. Chaired by former U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals Judge J. Michael Luttig and former Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson, the task force is the continuation of the work of the ABA Task Force for Democracy. Our mission is urgent and clear. Activate America's 1.3 million lawyers and 1,300 bar associations to fulfill their oath to uphold the Constitution and defend the rule of law, freedom of the press, and democratic norms in the courtroom and in their communities so that everyone plays by the same rules. Today, you will hear from our co-chairs and task force member, former Congressman Dick Gephardt, and the discussion will be moderated by NewsHour's Judy Woodruff, who is also a task force member. So now I would like to introduce our esteemed panelist and moderator, the Honorable Dick Gephardt. Dick Gephardt served for 28 years in the United States House of Representatives from 1976 to 2004. Representing Missouri's 3rd Congressional District. He was elected to serve as House Democratic Leader for more than 14 years, as House Majority Leader from 1989 to 1995, and Minority Leader from 1995 to 2003. Mr. Gephardt ran as a Democratic candidate for U.S. President twice, in 1998 and 2004. He retired from Congress in 2005 to found the Gephardt Group, a privately held labor relations consulting and governmental affairs firm. He has served on the boards of Ford Motor Company, CenturyLink, U.S. Steel Corporation, Spirit Aerosystems, and Centene Corporation. From 2009 to 2013, Mr. Gephardt served as chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy, a private nonprofit organization that endeavors to strengthen democratic institutions around the world through non-governmental efforts. He is an executive board member of Keep Our Republic and a member of the Task Force for American Democracy. The Honorable J. Charles Johnson. Jay Johnson served as Secretary of Homeland Security from 2013 to 2017, as General Counsel of the Department of Defense from 2009 to 2012, as General Counsel of the Department of the Air Force from 1998 to 2001, and as an Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York from 1989 to 1991. Secretary Johnson previously was in private law practice with Paul Weiss and retired from the firm in June 2025. He is also a member of the board of directors of MetLife and is co-chair of the board of trustees of Columbia University. His previous board service included Lockheed Martin and U.S. Steel. Secretary Johnson also currently serves on the board of directors of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum in New York City. He is the 2018 recipient of the Ronald Reagan Peace Through Strength Award, presented at the Reagan Presidential Library for, quote, contributing greatly to the defense of our nation and for guiding us through turbulent times with courage and wisdom. The Honorable J. Michael Luttig. Judge Luttig served on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit for 15 years, from 1991 to 2006, having been appointed by former President George H.W. Bush. Judge Luttig is currently counselor and special advisor to the Coca-Cola Company and the board of directors of the Coca-Cola Company. Judge Luttig was executive vice president and general counsel of the Boeing Company from 2006 to 2020. Before that, he served as Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice and as counselor to the Attorney General of the United States. Judge Luttig was Assistant Counsel to the President at the White House from 1981 to 1982 under former President Ronald Reagan. From 1982 to 1983, he was a law clerk to then Judge Antonin Scalia of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. From 1983 to 1985, he served as a law clerk and then special assistant to Chief Justice of the United States, Warren Burger. And our moderator, Judy Woodruff. Judy Woodruff is an American broadcast journalist who has worked in network, cable, and public television news since 1975. She was the anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour through the end of 2022. Ms. Woodruff has covered every presidential election and convention since 1976. She has interviewed multiple heads of state and moderated U.S. presidential debates. After graduating from Duke University, Ms. Woodruff entered local television news in Atlanta. She was named White House correspondent for NBC News in 1976, a position she held for 6 years. She also joined PBS in 1983 as chief Washington correspondent for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour. She moved to CNN in 1993 to anchor Inside Politics and CNN's Worldview Together with Bernard Shaw. Woodruff left CNN in 2005 and returned to PBS a year later. In 2013, the PBS NewsHour named her and the late Gwen Ifill the first two women to co-anchor a national newscast. So I'm thrilled to welcome all our speakers and our moderator today. And I will turn it over to Judy. Let's get started and dive in with our panelists.
Thank you, Mary. I'm very glad to be part of this discussion, this important discussion we're having today, and to be talking with our three distinguished panelists. My first question to all three of you is, as Mary said, this task force was formed in 2023. It was part of the American Bar Association. Today, it's being launched to continue into the future, but as an independent nonprofit. Secretary Johnson, why was that necessary?
Well, first of all, when Mary asked me to join this task force and co-chair it 2.5 years ago, I didn't hesitate to say yes because of Judge Luttig. He's one of my heroes, and the opportunity to co-chair and lead this task force with him was something I could not refuse. We're also privileged to have Leader Gephardt joining us, and the three of us represent experience in all three branches of government, I should add. My reason for joining this task force for democracy in my post-government life is we've discovered over the last several years that while we claim to be the most enduring, long-standing democracy on earth, our democracy is actually pretty fragile. because it depends not just on all three branches of government doing their job, checks and balances. It also depends upon leaders who take their oath, who observe not just the letter of the law and the Constitution, but constitutional and legal norms. So, for example, as Judge Luttig knows, the First Amendment is just 45 words, two semicolons, and a comma. But within those 45 words are enshrined the principles of freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of speech. And those principles have depended upon leaders of goodwill and responsibility observing not just the letter of the First Amendment, but First Amendment norm. When you have leaders of our national government who do not respect historic, legal, and constitutional norms, we see our democracy pushed possibly to the breaking point. And so we've brought together a group of very, very distinguished Americans across political partisan lines to do what we can to tour the nation, put out the word about the importance of preserving our democracy, particularly among younger people, I might add.
And Judge Luttig, what would you add to that? Why necessary to keep this task force going, and why is an independent entity?
Judy, it was almost 250 years ago when this great nation was founded. Next year, we will celebrate that 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence from King George III and the British Empire. From the moment of the signing of the Declaration of Independence until almost 5-6 years ago now, the United States of America was the envy of the world. It was the envy of the world for its democracy and its rule of law. It was for those two reasons that the American colonists declared their independence from the British Crown and established a government of democracy, that is, government by the people, and government under a rule of law, that is, under the Constitution of the United States. 6 years ago, or 5 years ago now, that the threat to America's democracy came about for the first time in those 250 years. But it came in the form of literally the gravest possible threat to America's democracy, when the then President Trump and now the current president attempted to overturn the 2020 presidential election, inciting a riot on the Capitol of the United States in order to block the joint session from counting the electoral votes for the presidency, which we knew at that point had made Joe Biden the next president of the United States. From that day until this day, the America's democracy and now its rule of law have come under the greatest possible threat in all of American history. And we set up this task force under Mary Smith's guidance in order to address that grave threat to America's democracy and to the rule of law. And we established it within the American Bar Association because it's America's lawyers and legal profession who are uniquely qualified to support and defend America's democracy and the Constitution, but they are also uniquely obligated by oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and America's democracy. As Mary said in her opening, today the lawyers of America comprise 1.2 to 1.3 million individual American citizens trained in the law, whose profession is the law. If we can mobilize that 1.2 million American lawyers and leverage that number of lawyers to even greater numbers of American citizenry, then we have at least a chance today of saving our democracy and rule of law. But make no mistake, Judy, America is being tested today, tested on whether it can any longer endure, as Abraham Lincoln might say, and whether we meet that test today will determine the future of the United States of America.
And Congressman Gephardt, what would you add to that? Why important to keep this task force and its mission going? And why do you want to be part of this?
So, Judy, I'm 84 years old. I was born in 1941. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. And I learned in civics class in grade school and high school that this experiment in self-government would always be here and would go through tough times, but would always prevail. The people would keep running it because we had institutions which would keep it strong and resilient and never to be questioned. As Mary said a moment ago, I had the privilege of being a public servant in this country for probably 35 years, starting in the city council in St. Louis and then through Congress. And what I learned from that was that the institutions, the three branches of our government that were set out in the Constitution, are really just people who represent all the American people, who were put in those positions to represent the people. But I also, from my legal training, I got a law degree at the University of Michigan way back when. I learned that the important feature of holding all this together was the rule of law, which was set out in our Constitution. And in the last 6 years, that rule of law has been under tremendous stress and threat. And Judge Luttig talked about the effort to overturn the 2020 election. That's a big part of what we have to deal with. But it's what's happened since then as well. And so when Jay Johnson and Judge Luttig asked me to be part of this effort, I jumped at it because I realized that when Ben Franklin said outside Constitution Hall in 1789, when asked if we were going to be a republic or a monarchy, he said, "We've decided to be a republic if we can keep it." We have been keeping it for 250 years. And if we're going to keep it now and in the future, this takes constant work and constant nurturing by all the people of this country to keep the magnificent gift that our founders gave us, that we could govern ourselves.
So each one of you served principally in a different branch of government, the executive, the legislative, the judiciary. I want to ask you about the state of democracy inside the branch that you principally mainly served in. Secretary Johnson, we know you were the Secretary of Homeland Security for 4 years. Tell us, as you look at the federal government today, the executive branch, what is the state? What is the health of democracy right now?
Judy, first thing I think of when you ask that question, presidential war powers. Presidential war powers right now, as we speak, are being pushed to the limit, if not over the limit. The way the framers designed our system, Congress declares war. The president, the commander in chief of the military, conducts the war. We have a system now where, in the current state of affairs, and I'm sure Leader Gephardt would agree, Congress has effectively gotten out of the business of authorizing war, and it's been left to the executive branch to justify legally the circumstances under which we conduct war. We now are in a situation where this president wants to treat low-level drug couriers on the high seas as enemy combatants suitable for military lethal force beyond what is, in my judgment, his legal authority to conduct armed force, military lethal force without congressional authorization. And because of the state of Congress right now, effectively, there's nobody that can stop him in either the legislative or judicial branch. Because as Judge Luttig knows, the courts, for the most part, have regarded armed conflict, presidential war power as essentially a political question. And there are very few people who actually have standing to bring such a lawsuit. So presidential war power is expanding more and more, and it's probably gone beyond anything that any president has tried before.
And just picking up on that, Congressman Gephardt, you heard the Secretary say Congress is, for all intents and purposes, not doing the work that it did in providing a check on the president. How do you see the state of democracy in the legislative branch? Is it fulfilling what the founders intended?
It's not at all. I never thought I would see a time when the Congress would totally be in the background and not willing to assert and retain its constitutional powers. What are those? Number one is the power of the purse. The Constitution says in Article 1 that the Congress can only spend taxpayer money. This Congress, under Republican leadership, has totally receded from any complaint to any actions by this administration with regard to spending taxpayer money. The president is stopping funding of programs that Congress has authorized and appropriated, and nobody utters a peep of dissent from that happening. Then there's the tariffs. The president has unilaterally, through emergency power orders, put tariffs on almost every country in the world. To my knowledge, that has never happened before. But again, Congress is not uttering a peep of dissent from that activity. Jay Johnson just talked about the war powers thing. I remember clearly when I was leader of the Democrats, we talked to George H.W. Bush before the Persian Gulf War won. He didn't want to get Congress involved. All the leaders, Republicans and Democrats, told him that he had to, and he did, and we had a vote. The same thing happened with the war in Iraq. George W. Bush said to us, we don't need the Congress to be involved. And we said, you do. You can't take a democracy to war without the people's consent. He did, and we voted on it, and we made that decision. Finally, a recent example of Congress just looking the other way when the president just contravenes a law that they passed. Last year, Congress passed what's called the TikTok bill, which said that that we had to sell, that China had to stop operating TikTok for a lot of national security reasons in the United States. And they set out a schedule for that to happen unless there was a way that it could be moved into completely American hands, with the algorithm, which is the key of the whole operation, being totally shut down by China. In the last weeks, President Trump is announcing that he's got a deal for a bunch of American investors who had invested in TikTok before to take it over, but they have not figured out the algorithm problem. And so, in effect, if this goes through the way it looks, will Congress say anything about him breaking a law and not paying any attention to a law that they passed? I doubt it. So we're into a real crisis in our country where Congress is willing to let the executive branch do almost anything it wants and not dissent or try to stop him from doing anything he wants.
And Judge Luttig, you did serve for what, 15 years on the federal appellate court. Tell us, from your estimation, what is the health of democracy in that branch that you know so well?
Well, Judy, never before in all of American history have the federal courts been attacked at all, let alone by the President of the United States of America. And those attacks by the President have been unrelenting and vicious, attacking not just courts themselves, but especially attacking individual judges who have ruled against the president in one context or another. His objective is obvious. First, it's to delegitimize the federal courts in the eyes of the American public. And second, just as obvious, his purpose is to intimidate the federal judiciary into ruling in his favor. Now, the interim effect, if you will, of these threats is unmistakable. Today, the federal judiciary is living under a cloud of fear of the President of the United States. Now, to date, I've said publicly many times, the lower federal courts, by which I mean the federal district courts and the United States Courts of Appeals, have honored their oath to the letter. And as a consequence, they have struck down essentially every single initiative of this president since he took office again in January of 2025. Today, there's a self-inflicted crisis within the Supreme Court of the United States, because the Supreme Court is deciding, quote, deciding many of the most important questions of constitutional law in our government and in our society on what is called the shadow docket. What that means in effect is that the Supreme Court is taking all of these or many of these decisions against the president from the lower federal courts, docketing those cases for decision by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court then never accepts briefing or argument on the issues and renders not an opinion of constitutional law, but rather an order that does not include one single word of reasoning, legal analysis, or explanation for the Supreme Court staying, that is, stopping the lower court decisions from becoming effective. The Supreme Court of the United States, Judy, famously, it is said, doesn't have either the power of the sword or the power of the purse. Its only power, such as it is its written opinions and judgments, and therefore its persuasiveness in interpreting the Constitution of the United States. When the Supreme Court is issuing order after order on the most important constitutional questions possible in our society, without one single word of explanation, reasoning, or constitutional analysis, it is acting illegitimately. It has been acting illegitimately for the first 10 months of Donald Trump's presidency. That's why I call it a self-inflicted crisis. Never before in American history has the Supreme Court acted this way, and it must stop immediately. The Supreme Court's own integrity is at stake, and of course, poll after poll shows, rightly so, in my view, that the Supreme Court is plummeting in the eyes of the American people. It must return to its constitutional obligation, which is to decide cases by written opinion.
Well, given the state of affairs that each one of you is describing, let me ask you now what it is that the task force intends to focus on. And I'm going to ask the three of you to answer this, starting with you, Secretary Johnson. What is the task force in particular focusing on that would address what you described as taking place in the executive branch?
Well, first, one of the things we worked on while we were still affiliated with the ABA was this 100-page report, which was issued September 10th. It has a number of recommendations in it, like, for example, citizen redistricting committees, bar associations across the country, reconsidering the oath of admission. There are a number of recommendations here which we will continue to promote and pursue. Beyond that, we plan to reach out to as many different bar associations and other organizations that we can. This is not just about lawyers, but interested Americans who are concerned about the state of the democracy, and encourage them to get involved along with us in preserving our democracy. We've been, I think, surprised and reassured over the last 2 years since we stood up this task force with the number of people who've come out when we go on listening tours across the country, concerned about their democracy, concerned about their country. And we want to continue that effort to get the word out that our democracy is at stake and it is really fragile.
And Dick Gephardt, Congressman Gephardt,
Yes.
what do you see the task force working on that you think is a priority?
Well, I believe it will continue working on what we were working on over the last years, and that is helping us have valid, trusted elections. We know from 2020 and what Judge Luttig talked about, the activities of President Trump and his supporters to overturn the obvious results of the 2020 election, that President Trump is really not willing to allow elections that he doesn't win. And now he has, again, the total power of the executive branch. He learned a lot from what happened in 2020 of what didn't work and what might work. And there is tremendous worry that there will be unconventional threats to having a valid, trusted election in 2026. And the legal community can have a huge impact on how that turns out, because the main way that the administration can obviate the results of that election, if they lose, if they win, it's fine. If they lose, there's a variety of ways they can twist laws, just disregard laws to get the result that they want out in the states that they don't desire, that they don't want. And so this task force should work with other groups like Keep Our Republic, which I've been a part of, and Keep Our Republic has worked with the task force in the last 5 years to continue this work to make sure we have a valid, trusted election in 2026. If we can't have that, we're in big trouble. It will be the first time that really happened in American history.
And Congressman Gephardt, just a quick follow-up. What's an example of something that an attorney who's out there, who's watching this, could do that could be of assistance in the election, ensuring that elections remain honest, fair, open, legal?
We're going to ask lawyers in various states, in all the states really, to work together to be ready and able to file lawsuits and to take legal actions to stop unconventional threats to having a valid election. Let me give you an example. There may be an effort by red state governors to simply not certify Democratic winners because they allege there's fraud, even though there is no fraud. So the only remedy for that I'm aware of is for lawyers in that state to go to court to stop that activity, to stop that action by the governor of that state. So there's a whole, we are scenario planning right now. We're looking at all the possible ways that an election can be upset and overcome with specious claims. And the legal community is going to have a central and vital role in dealing with all of that if and when it happens.
And Judge Luttig, what else do you see this task force doing? What are some examples of what the task force is trying to see take place in order to hold off the crisis that each one of you is describing, and in particular in the judiciary?
Well, Mary Smith created 2+ years ago the Blue Ribbon Task Force of all Blue Ribbon task forces. As I said over the past couple of years, to the person, the members of the task force were some of, if not the most articulate, eloquent, and passionate defenders of America's democracy and rule of law. And as a result of the composition of the ABA task force, we were able to leverage the task force essentially into every democracy organization across America. And indeed, we, and by we today, I mean those of you who are on this call and our colleagues on the task force, in many ways led the efforts over the past, in the year leading up to the election. Turning to the specific question, what lawyers can do, we did yeoman's work in mobilizing the legal profession in the 2 years leading up to the last presidential election. But my former political party, the Republican parties, led by the current president, they politicized the elections in the United States of America. And they are continuing to do that today. As a consequence of that politicization, many people, not just lawyers, but unfortunately, especially lawyers, have feared getting involved because the Republicans and the current president have made clear to all Americans, but specifically to lawyers, that they will pay a price if they involve themselves in the support and defense of America's democracy and the Constitution of the United States. And regrettably, we were met with that response when we tried to enlist many of the nation's lawyers in that effort to support democracy the last go-round. This time, the politicization is even greater, and the threats to those who would attempt to support America's democracy and rule of law are that much greater and more intense. So it's our job to try to convince all Americans, but especially the legal profession, that they must have the courage to, that's the watchword today in America, Judy. All of us, all of we Americans, we the people, we must summon the courage that is needed today to keep our republic, as Congressman Gephardt said.
And Secretary Johnson, and I'll just come this final round of questions for you all. How do you convey to people that they do have the courage to do what you're asking them to do in the face of the kinds of things that you've been describing?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? More and more Americans, according to surveys, distrust their government. They're apathetic, they're cynical, they're tuned out. And our challenge, especially among younger Americans, is to remind everyone that a democracy is something you can't take for granted. A democracy is your voice. A democracy is self-determination. It's free speech. It's freedom of religion. It's freedom of assembly. It's freedom to choose your leadership, your representatives in Washington. And without it, we slide down a dark hole into autocracy, oppression, and this influences our very economy as well. So it's our challenge to inspire, mobilize people to care about this, when we're in a situation now where a lot of people are very cynical and distrustful of their government. They're drowning in conspiracy theories and they don't believe anything that their government tells them anymore. And so, over the next year before the midterms and over the next 3 years before the next presidential election, we've got a real challenge to get people to start paying attention again.
And I should add that I know one of the missions of the task force is to work on the attacks that Mary described on freedom of the press, on the First Amendment, and shoring up the courage of news organizations to do the important work that democracy demands. Congressman Gephardt, what would you say to this question of courage to people who are watching and listening?
Well, I think we just have to say to people that we're the luckiest people on planet Earth. If you're an American citizen, you won the lottery. We got lots of problems. We always have problems. We always need to do better at solving those problems. But I would ask people, do you see anybody trying to leave the United States? Do you see millions of people risking their lives to get here? To be an American citizen? We were given a magnificent gift by the founders. My analogy would be we were given a beautiful house called the Constitution. But when they gave it to us, they knew that unless we kept it in order, unless we protected it, unless we nurtured it every day, it would fall down and it would be lost. In 1789, we were the first country in human history that decided that people could govern themselves. We can lose this. We're in the process of losing it. We cannot have that happen. And everybody can do something. People come up to me all the time today in airports and restaurants, and they say, "Are we going to be okay?" And I say, "Yes, we will if you do something." And let me just end with this. The American people are as polarized and divided almost as much and maybe as much as we were in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think a prime reason is the way social media operates, which addicts us our attention to algorithmic messages, which makes us hateful and outraged and upset. We have to do something about that. But part of what we all can do is to go talk to someone in our community who we know we violently disagree with and listen to them. Treat them with respect. They may know something you don't know. You don't have to agree with them, but listen to them. And we've got to heal this polarization. We've got to heal this division if we're to keep this great gift that we were given by our founders.
And finally, Judge Luttig, you have been deeply involved in this effort, as our other panelists have. What would you add in terms of what's at stake here? What final message do you want to leave for the people who are watching, who are listening to this? And I would just say a reminder, this is a completely nonpartisan effort. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not some other party. It's all the above.
Well, Judy, no one can look at America today and fail to understand that literally our democracy and rule of law are at stake. Many, many, many millions of Americans have believed that for years. But today, no one can look at America and not understand that the time has come. The time has finally come for Americans to stand up for the democracy and rule of law that defines our country. If they don't stand up now, they will never have another opportunity.
Well, thank you, each one of you, for your contributions. Thank you for taking part in this panel, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Smith, who is the director of the task force. Mary.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, Judge Luttig, and Congressman. What an amazing launch of the task force. Today, you've heard that the mission of the task force is urgent and existential. We heard that the work must continue. Why? Because there's so much more work to do. And I think the most important thing is we need all of you. Whether you're a lawyer or you're not a lawyer, we need everyone. And the task force is going to be continuing its work in this exciting new chapter as a nonpartisan, independent organization. What are we going to be doing? We're going to be mobilizing lawyers and bar associations. We're going to be standing up for the independence of the judiciary. We are going to be supporting free speech and the First Amendment, ensuring the integrity of our elections, and most importantly, engaging all of you. Whether I know it's hard sometimes we're inundated with news that's happening, lack of due process, people being deported, judges being attacked. But you know what? All of us have the power. We all have power and we all need to work together. So whether you have 5 minutes, a couple hours, or much more time, we need you. So go to our website at www.democracy-taskforce.org, and we have ways to engage, whether you speak to your community, speak in your workplace, write an op-ed, write a blog piece, volunteer to work on elections in your community, or if you're a lawyer, volunteer to take a case. We have several options for all of you. And what I would say is, I know for some of us, the rule of law is an amorphous concept, but the rule of law are the rules of the road for our democracy. So imagine if we didn't have traffic signals, there would be chaos on the streets. Well, there's chaos if we don't have our democracy, and we need all of you to help us. So I'm going to end with a quote from our esteemed co-chair, Judge Luttig. This is the Super Bowl of democracy, and we need all of you on the field. So thank you for joining us. We're going to be educating the public as well. Our next webinar will be on November 12th, honoring veterans and the military, and it's going to be exploring the important question of the use of the U.S. military on U.S. soil. So thanks for joining us today, and please go to our website, engage, and support us. Thank you again for joining us today.